Chapter 1. A bride for the Wolf of Ravenshade. Eleanor sat very still, hands clasped tightly in her lap, as her mother pinned a pale lilac rose into her hair. Her reflection in the cracked mirror was as delicate as bone china, fine, quiet, and trembling ever so slightly. "You'll be a duchess by nightfall," Lady Renford said softly, fastening the final pin with a sigh that sounded more like regret than triumph. "Do try not to faint at the altar, Ellie. He's a duke, not a dragon." Eleanor wasn't so sure, because the man she was to marry was not merely a duke. He was the Duke Alaric Thorne, the coldest wolf alpha in all of Endrovia, Lord of Ravenshade Castle, rumored to have sent his last mistress fleeing into a convent. The nobles whispered he had no heart, only teeth, a wolf in tailored suits. And now he would be her husband. "I don't want to be a duchess," Eleanor whispered, voice as light as frost. "I just wanted to fall in love." Her mother paused, her hand dropping to her. "Oh, Ellie," she said. "No one marries for love anymore." But Eleanor did. She still believed in love. In the kind that made one's heart ache with poetry and longing, the kind that existed in her favorite stories, the ones she read by candlelight in the garden, wrapped in shawls and hope. And now she was to marry a man who made ice look warm. The wedding took place not in a chapel, but in the echoing, stone-cold halls of Ravenshade itself, a castle perched high in the north, where the wolves howled louder than the wedding bells. Eleanor stood before the altar, barely 5'2" and shaking in her satin slippers, trying not to cry as the officiant droned on. Her veil fluttered with every shallow breath. Alaric Thorne didn't even glance at her. He was tall, broad, and infuriatingly silent beside her. Dressed in black from throat to boots, his silver cufflinks were the only brightness on him, other than his piercing steel-gray eyes that looked as if they hadn't known a smile in years. He exuded power and cold distance, as if marriage was no more significant than signing a business contract. Which for him, it probably was. "Do you, Duke Alaric Thorne of Ravenshade, take Eleanor Renford?" "Yes," he cut in flatly. A tiny gasp escaped Eleanor. The officiant blinked. "I hadn't finished the sentence, Your Grace." "I don't need the full sentence to know I agree," Alaric said without inflection. He was already done with the ceremony. Eleanor's lower lip trembled. She almost tripped on her own words when her turn came, but somehow she said, "I do." And then they were married. Just like that. No kiss, not even a touch. He didn't even look at her when she offered her gloved hand. He merely walked away, hands in his pockets, as the castle echoed with polite applause, and the staff quietly began clearing the ceremonial table. Eleanor stood there, blinking. "Welcome to Ravenshade," said a dry voice beside her. She turned to see a young man with sandy blonde hair and a smirk that suggested he'd seen 1,000 such weddings. "I'm Callan, His Grace's beta and, unofficially, the one who apologizes for his moods." He bowed slightly. "Congratulations on your marriage." He only looked mildly disgusted during the ceremony. "That's a good start." Eleanor blinked. "Oh, I see." Callan chuckled. "Come on, Duchess. Let's get you acquainted with your new home. There's tea in the East Wing. And maybe, if we're lucky, Your Grace won't sulk through supper." That evening, dinner was quiet. Alaric sat at the head of the long mahogany table like a carved statue, sipping his wine and not saying a word. Eleanor, seated beside him, tried to fill the silence. She complimented the roast. He nodded. She asked about the library. He grunted. She spilled a little gravy on her lap and squeaked. He didn't even blink. When the butler brought out dessert, she whispered, "This pie is delightful, isn't it?" Alaric finally looked at her. His voice was low, dismissive. "Is it your goal to narrate every course?" Eleanor's cheeks turned crimson. She went quiet for the rest of the meal, cradling her warm teacup like a lifeline and wondering what on earth she had done to deserve such a frigid husband. That night, in the marital suite, Eleanor stood in her nightgown, simple cotton, modestly buttoned to her throat, and watched as Alaric shrugged off his coat and rolled up his sleeves. He didn't look at her. "You may take the bed," he said, voice flat. "I don't bite unless provoked." She clutched the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I don't provoke people," she said softly. He paused at the window, one hand resting on the pane. "Good." And then, without a glance, he strode out of the bedroom and into the adjoining chamber, slamming the door behind him. Eleanor sat down on the edge of the bed, alone. Married, unkissed, unwanted, she pressed her palms to her cheeks, trying not to cry. Then reached under her pillow and pulled out her worn copy of Wuthering Moonlight, her favorite romance novel, and whispered to herself, "Maybe tomorrow, he'll say goodnight." Chapter 2. Eleanor woke to silence. Ravenshade Castle didn't sing like Renford Hall. Back home, mornings were soft and lively. Birds chirped, maids chattered, and breakfast trays arrived with hot scones and clotted cream. Here, the air was cold and unwelcoming, like the castle was holding its breath. A heavy fog pressed against the tall arched windows, veiling the mountains beyond in white. Even the fire in her hearth crackled reluctantly, as if it too had grown weary of trying to warm this place. She sat up, shivering in her nightgown. No breakfast tray, no greetings, just a brass bell on the nightstand that, when rung timidly, brought a stone-faced maid who wordlessly helped her into her gown, and left with a curtsy so stiff it could have cut glass. Eleanor stood alone before her wardrobe, wrapped in a heavy shawl, staring at a dozen gowns she didn't recognize. All of them were black. She blinked. "Is there a funeral?" Callan's voice startled her from the doorway. "Only the funeral of color, Duchess. His Grace has a certain aesthetic. Mood, perpetual mourning." Eleanor jumped, clutching her shawl. "You startled me." Callan raised a brow. "You're in his castle now. Expect the occasional dramatic flair. I, for one, accessorize with sarcasm to survive it." She cracked a tiny smile. "Do you always barge into ladies' rooms unannounced?" I knocked. "Twice." He leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed. "Your maid doesn't speak much, and His Grace, well, he speaks even less. Thought I'd check in. Make sure the new Duchess hadn't leapt out a window." Eleanor moved to the window and peered through the fog. "Too high," she murmured. "I'd only break an ankle." Callan grinned. "So there is a sense of humor beneath all that innocence. I read a lot of romantic fiction. The heroines are often tragic, but they make jokes before crying." He tilted his head. "Let's aim for fewer tears, Duchess. His Grace might be impossible, but he's not, well, he hasn't maimed anyone in years." That was hardly comforting. The Duke was in his study by mid-morning, staring at maps, war maps. Eleanor didn't know what kind. He rarely left the estate, but his intensity was startling. Even from the hallway, she could feel the cold, powerful presence behind the oaken door. She tiptoed past it. Her plan that morning was simple: explore the castle, avoid her husband, and maybe find the rumored solarium with the climbing roses. Instead, she found Poppy. Or rather, Poppy found her. "Oh my stars, you're real," said the young woman in the kitchens, eyes wide as saucers. "We thought His Grace had married a ghost." Eleanor, standing awkwardly with her hands clasped before her, blinked. Pardon?" Poppy wiped her floury hands on her apron and marched over, inspecting Eleanor's dress. "You're a wee thing, ain't you? I'd heard you were delicate, but this is a porcelain doll situation." "Do you eat? Should I be concerned?" Eleanor stammered. Yes, I mean, I do eat." "Well, come on then," Poppy said, taking her by the arm and marching her to a wooden chair near the hearth. "Sit, you look like a woman who needs scones and gossip." Poppy, as it turned out, was the kitchen maid, head scullery snitch, and one-woman information hub of Ravenshade Castle. She had opinions on everything. "His Grace don't talk because he's afraid the sound of joy might kill him," she said, setting down a plate. "And the beta, Callan? That man flirts like it's a sport. Don't let it fool you. He's got the emotional depth of a puddle." "I thought he was kind," Eleanor offered gently. Poppy shrugged. "Kind, yes, but shallow as a teacup. You, on the other hand, have the look of a woman who believes love conquers all." "I do," Eleanor said quietly, eyes dropping to her lap. "I always have." Poppy studied her for a moment, then softened. "Oh, love. This place'll try to crush that out of you." "I know," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I won't let it." By the end of the week, Eleanor had developed a routine. She woke early, sat in the frigid breakfast room where Alaric read his newspaper in silence, and made small talk that floated into the void like a feather in a snowstorm. He rarely replied. If he did, it was curt. And yet, she kept trying. "Do you enjoy poetry?" she asked one morning. "No." "Do you play piano?" "No." "Do you like anything?" Pause, a flick of his eyes. Quiet. She sipped her tea and nodded. I see. Well, I suppose I'll enjoy this conversation on your behalf then. That night, there was a storm, a furious one. Rain lashed the windows and thunder cracked like a whip through the mountains. Eleanor, curled beneath 3 layers of blankets, clutched her book to her chest and tried not to think about how far from home she felt. A knock startled her. She sat up, heart pounding. It wasn't the maid, it was him. Alaric stood in the doorway, shirt slightly unbuttoned, a bottle in hand, and a storm in his expression that matched the one outside. "I need a drink," he said, "and I'm told married people sometimes share those." Eleanor blinked. "Oh." He walked in, no invitation needed, and sat heavily in the chair near the hearth. "I dislike storms." She closed her book slowly. "Do they frighten you?" He snorted. "Nothing frightens me. I just find them irritating." He uncorked the bottle and poured a splash into 2 small glasses on the tray beside him. "Have a drink, Duchess. If nothing else, it may dull the agony of my company." 1 drink turned to 2. Then 3. They didn't speak much, but something in the room changed. Not quite warm, but not frozen either. Eleanor giggled softly at one point, when Alaric muttered something about weather being the only beast more relentless than marriage. He glanced at her then, really looked. "Why do you keep trying?" he asked, voice lower now. "You speak to me as if you expect kindness in return." Eleanor looked down at her hands. "I don't expect it, I just hope for it." There was a silence, and then, completely unexpected, he offered her a slow, faint nod. "Hope is dangerous, Duchess," he said quietly. "So is whiskey," she replied, holding up her glass. They drank. Later, much later, after the storm had quieted and the fire burned low, Eleanor felt her eyes grow heavy. She hadn't laughed so much in years, or maybe ever. Not at the way he teased her for using the word delightful so often, not at the way she stubbornly refused to say hell and instead used heck like an old librarian. He was different when drunk, not soft but less cruel, almost human. And then, somewhere between a shared smile and a clumsy toast, he leaned closer. Their glasses touched, then their hands, and then his lips. Chapter 3. The morning after Eleanor stirred before the sun rose, as she always did, trained by years of quiet discipline and the delicate routine of a proper lady. But today, the moment her eyes opened, she knew something was terribly wrong. For one, the sheets smelled like him. And secondly, she wasn't in her bed. A heavy weight lay across her waist, firm and warm, breathing slow and steady against the curve of her neck. She froze, her head pounded, her mouth was dry, and her nightgown was gone. She didn't dare look, not yet. She shut her eyes tightly, willing it to be a fever dream. But the scent, pine and smoke and dark winter, was unmistakably his. No dream could make her skin remember that smell, or that rough baritone whisper that had told her, sometime in the blurred, drunken haze of the storm, "You're too soft for a place like this, little dove." She remembered the clink of glasses, a laugh, a long silence, the feel of his fingertips tracing her jaw. Then heat, weight, pressure. Oh God. Eleanor swallowed. Slowly she tilted her head. He lay beside her shirtless, his chest rising and falling in slow, even breaths. Alaric looked younger in sleep, less cruel. His lashes were thick, his lips barely parted. But the sharp line of his jaw, the darkness in his brows, and the raw power that emanated from his body, none of that softened. And she was in his bed. Not hers. She tried to shift away, delicately, like a mouse sliding from beneath a lion's paw, but his arm tightened instinctively. A low rumble escaped his throat, not a growl exactly, more like a sound of disapproval. "You're awake," she whispered. "Nothing." Then, after a breath, barely. His voice was rough, deeper than normal, and edged with something else, something dangerous. "Do you remember?" she asked. He opened one eye, a pause. "No," he said flatly. "Do you?" Her face went crimson. "Bits." He closed his eyes again, exhaling through his nose. "Then let us agree to forget the rest." That stung more than it should have. Eleanor pulled the covers up to her chin, eyes wide. "We should talk about—" "There's nothing to talk about, but you're my wife," he said coldly, now sitting up and swinging his legs over the edge of the bed. "Whatever happened is legally sanctioned and no business of the household. That's not—" He turned his head, gaze icy. "Don't mistake regret for romance, Eleanor. It was a mistake. We were drunk. You wanted a warm fire." "I obliged." His words struck like frostbite. She pulled the sheets tighter, sinking into the bed. He rose, grabbing his discarded shirt from the floor. "I'll have the servants move your things back to your room." "Of course," she whispered, staring down at the linen, her hands trembling slightly. As he left, she heard him pause at the door. "You're not hurt?" She looked up. "No." A beat of silence. Then, quietly, "Good." And he was gone. The next few weeks passed in a strange blur. Alaric was colder than before. Not cruel, just distant, detached, as if that stormy night had never happened. Eleanor returned to her quiet routines, tea, embroidery, reading by the frozen window. She didn't cry. Much. Only when no one was around. She wrote a letter to her sister back home, tore it up before posting it. What could she say? "Dear Margaret, I'm pregnant by a man who barely looks at me, and I'm terrified." But it was too soon to know for sure. She had always been regular, but this month her cycle didn't come. She told herself it was stress. And then the next month passed, still nothing. Her appetite changed. Certain smells, lavender soap, roasted duck, made her nauseous. Her chest ached. Her moods were like candle flames in the wind, up, down, all over the place. One morning she vomited into the wash basin before breakfast. The maid said nothing, but her eyes lingered too long. Callan was the first to corner her. It happened in the garden courtyard, where she sat feeding crumbs to the winter robins, bundled in a wool cloak, her skin pale and trembling. "You look like death," he said. "I feel like it," she whispered. He squatted beside her, studying her face. "You've been avoiding everyone. The servants say you're ill. The cook says you're not eating. I'm fine, you're lying." She said nothing. Callan exhaled slowly. "Is it him?" Tears threatened to spill. She shook her head once, and then, too fragile to resist, it all came pouring out. Her trembling lips, the missed cycle, the sickness, the aching fear. When she finished, he sat back on his heels and blinked. Bloody hell. "I think I'm pregnant," she said, barely able to breathe. "And I don't think I can tell him. You have to tell him." "I can't," she whispered, eyes wide. "You saw how he reacted after. He called it a mistake." Callan stood, pacing the gravel. "Eleanor, he's an alpha. He's the Duke. He needs to know." "I'm scared," she whispered. "I don't want to be sent away." "Why would he send you away?" "Because I'm weak. I cry. I faint when I'm nervous. And now I'm pregnant, and he doesn't even want me near his bed." Callan knelt in front of her again and took her icy hands in his. "Listen to me. You are his wife. You're carrying his child. Possibly his heir. That means you have power, Eleanor, even if you don't feel it." She shook her head. "I'm not like you, or him. I'm just soft." Callan smiled softly, and thank the gods for that. This house needs softness like it needs sunlight. That night, Eleanor stood in front of Alaric's study door for 20 minutes, mustering courage. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again. Inside, papers rustled. Enter. She opened the door slowly. He was by the fireplace, coat discarded, sleeves rolled up, shirt slightly unbuttoned. He didn't look at her. "I need a word," she said, barely louder than a whisper. He turned a page in a book. "I'm working. It's important." His gaze flicked up, sharp, then speak. Her throat closed, hands clenched, voice trembling. I'm with child." Silence. The crackle of the fire was the only sound for a long, painful moment. His face gave nothing away. Then, finally, "Yours?" Eleanor's jaw dropped. Tears welled instantly. How dare you?" He stood, slowly, dangerously. "You disappear for weeks, avoid me, refuse meals, speak to my beta more than to me. And now you come bearing news of an heir?" She backed away, shaking. "You're cruel." "I'm cautious," he snapped. "The court will want bloodlines confirmed. Titles demand it." Her voice broke. "It's yours. I've never been with anyone else." His eyes narrowed, and in that moment something shifted in him, something dark and primal. He crossed the room in 3 long strides. "You're carrying my child." She nodded once, tear-streaked and shaking. His hand lifted, hovering at her cheek. But he didn't touch her. Instead, he said in a low voice, "We'll confirm it with the physician. Until then, you'll remain here. With guards. Under my roof. Is that clear?" She nodded again. He turned away, fists clenched at his sides, but before she left she heard him mutter under his breath, "Not one, but two." She froze. "What did you say?" He looked up, eyes strange. "Nothing." Chapter 4. The silence in the physician's room was stifling. Eleanor sat on the examination table, back straight despite the tremble in her limbs, her hands resting over her stomach as if to shield herself from the world. The room was lined with shelves of tinctures and tonics, herbs hanging to dry in little bundles overhead, and the faint smell of mint and rosemary made her stomach roll. Dr. Fenwick was an elderly wolf, once the royal physician, now retired to the Duke's estate as a quiet favor from Alaric's late father. He was kind-eyed, meticulous, and slow, painfully slow as he adjusted his spectacles and peered down at the notes he'd just scribbled. Alaric stood by the window, arms crossed tightly over his chest. His shoulders were rigid, his jaw a slash of granite, and he hadn't looked directly at Eleanor since they entered the room together. The weight of his presence was crushing. And not in a protective way. He was a storm cloud, waiting to burst. "Your Grace," the doctor began at last, "it is confirmed. The Lady Duchess is with child." Eleanor sucked in a breath, but she didn't speak. She didn't move. Her palms stayed pressed gently against her middle, as if anchoring herself to the earth. Alaric's voice was clipped. "How far along?" "Approximately 9 weeks, give or take," Dr. Fenwick said, flipping through his notes. "She'll begin showing in another month or so. A winter birth, if my estimates are correct." Alaric's brows twitched, barely. "And she's healthy." "Remarkably so," Fenwick said with a small smile toward Eleanor, "though she'll need rest, and far more food. She's been eating like a bird." "I haven't had much of an appetite," Eleanor said softly. "Well, that will need to change," Fenwick said kindly. "Your body is no longer just your own, Your Grace. You're carrying a legacy now." Alaric flinched. "And," the doctor continued almost as an afterthought, "there's one more thing." Eleanor blinked. "Yes?" "I detected more than one heartbeat." She stared at him. "What?" Alaric turned slowly, brows lowering. "Explain." "It's not uncommon in your line," Fenwick murmured, removing his glasses. "The shifter gene is strong. Your family has a history of twins, particularly among alpha-born lines. The Lady Duchess is with twins." For a second, no one spoke. The news hung in the air like thunder about to clap. Eleanor felt everything and nothing at once. The floor vanished from under her feet, her mouth went dry, her lungs forgot how to work. Two babies, her babies, his babies. Alaric stared at her, truly stared for the first time in weeks, his expression unreadable, not shocked, not angry, but something else, something deeper. "Leave us," he said to the doctor. Fenwick hesitated, then gave a polite bow and shuffled out, the door clicking shut behind him. They were alone. Eleanor slid off the table slowly, wrapping her arms around herself like a fragile porcelain doll trying not to crack. "He didn't speak." She turned toward him, small and pale and terrified. "Say something." He walked to her, carefully like approaching a frightened creature, and stopped just an arm's length away. "You're carrying my twins." Her lips trembled. "Yes." He tilted his head slightly. "And you told no one but Callan?" "I was scared." Her voice cracked. "You made me feel like a mistake, like that night was something shameful." He flinched, just barely, "But it was there I didn't know," he murmured. "You didn't want to know," she whispered. "You just wanted to forget. I didn't think you would be." He trailed off, looking pained, fertile. "After one time," her eyes welled with tears, "I'm not broken. I never said you were." "No," she corrected. "But you looked at me like I was made of glass you didn't want to touch. Like I was in the way." A silence settled. He didn't deny it. "I didn't know how to handle you," he admitted. "You're soft. Too soft for me. And He stopped, voice low, almost a growl. "I don't do soft." She blinked up at him. "That doesn't mean I don't matter." He stepped closer, and for the first time since that night, he reached out and touched her. Just a hand at her side, gentle but firm, warm through the silk of her dress. "You're carrying my blood," he said. "Twice over. I won't abandon you." "That's not what I want," she whispered. "Then what do you want, Eleanor?" Her throat tightened. She didn't say love, because that word would terrify him. But she did say, "I want to matter. To you." He looked at her for a long time. Then quietly he said, "You do." She gasped softly, because it felt like a gift, that simple truth from a man who rarely gave anything away. He exhaled slowly and pressed a palm to her stomach. "You're shaking," he said. "Sit." She sat. He knelt. He, the Duke, the Alpha Lord feared across 3 provinces, knelt at her feet, resting his forehead briefly against her knee as if grounding himself. "Twins?" he muttered. "Bloody hell." Despite herself, she laughed, a soft, watery, musical sound. "I'm going to be enormous," she whispered. His lips twitched. "No doubt. I'll waddle. I'll build you a better chair. I'll cry." "Often. You already do." She slapped his shoulder with a trembling hand, and his eyes actually softened. "I won't be good at this," he confessed, startling her. "I don't know how to be a husband, or a father, but I'll protect you. You'll want for nothing." "I want you," she said, and then immediately regretted saying it out loud. His expression shuddered. She looked down, humiliated. "I don't know if I can give you that," he admitted. "I know. But I can give you safety." She nodded, tears slipping down again. Then he stood and took her hand. "Come," he said quietly. "Where?" "To your new rooms." That night, Eleanor was moved into the Duke's wing. Her chambers were warm, gold-trimmed, heavy velvet drapes, silk sheets, pillows stuffed with down. An entire wardrobe appeared overnight, soft wool dresses and embroidered shawls and comfortable slippers lined with fur. The servants were attentive but quiet, avoiding her eyes with deference now. She was the mother of the future heirs. Her stomach turned as the reality settled in her bones. She wasn't just a meek girl anymore. She was his duchess, and whether he loved her or not, he was no longer pretending she didn't exist. He didn't visit her that night, but in the middle of the next morning, a tray appeared. Fresh toast, wild berry preserves, porridge, 2 boiled eggs, ginger tea for nausea. And a note, "Eat all of it." As she laughed for the first time in weeks. Chapter 5. The first signs of Eleanor's pregnancy appeared quietly. It began with her sleeping more, long naps during the afternoon, sudden drowsiness in the mornings, and evenings where she would curl on the window seat with her hands on her stomach and doze off, even before finishing her tea. Her appetite grew too, first for sweetbread and clotted cream, then for strawberries dipped in honey, then roasted meats with gravy she'd once found too heavy. The servants in the Duke's wing were instructed, silently but firmly, to ensure she was never without food or fire. Her bath was warmed twice a day, her feet never touched cold floors, her pillows multiplied, and soon Eleanor began to understand something strange about Alaric. While he was emotionally cold, he was physically attentive. He never lingered too long in a room with her, but her comfort was always arranged. It was the kind of care that made her ache. He was present without ever being truly there. And when her bump began to show, Eleanor did what she always did. She hid it. At first. Until her handmaid, a tall, red-haired woman named Mila, chided her gently. "They're yours, milady," Mila said one morning, lacing up Eleanor's gown a little more loosely than usual. "No need to hide them like shame." Eleanor looked down, blinking at the small swell of her abdomen beneath the pale yellow muslin. It was still barely there, but to her it was everything. "I'm not ashamed," she whispered. Mila met her eyes in the mirror. "Then stand tall." Eleanor smiled faintly. "I'll try." That evening, the Duke's estate was hosting its first winter gathering. It was a formal dinner. Noble guests from neighboring territories, landowners, 2 baronesses, a viscount, a few allied alphas, and their wives, and one particular guest who had sent Eleanor's nerves into a quiet spiral since she heard the name. Lady Callista Marrow, Alaric's former almost fiancée. They had never made it to a formal betrothal, but the rumors had once been vicious. Callista was stunning, tall, platinum blonde, with ice-blue eyes and the kind of figure that made dresses look sculpted to her. She was known for her wit, her breeding, and her exceptional talent for turning heads in any ballroom she entered. Eleanor, seated at her vanity, stared at her reflection. She was not Callista. Her own hair was a duller, mousy brown. Her figure was soft, too soft, she thought, with gentle curves and no sharp edges. She looked plain, especially now, 4 months into pregnancy, her waist vanishing slowly but surely. "Don't you dare compare yourself to her," Mila muttered, fixing Eleanor's braid into an elegant crown. "You're the one carrying the Duke's future. That's power." "I don't feel powerful," Eleanor murmured. "You don't have to." Just look the part. When Eleanor stepped into the grand dining hall that night, a hush fell. She was radiant in an empire-waist sapphire gown, the fabric flowing over her small bump like water, her shoulders bare but for a sheer wrap, and a silver pin glinting at her temple. Her skin glowed under the candlelight, and her cheeks were flushed with nerves. Alaric, already at the head of the table, looked up and stared. He stood, quietly but decisively, and walked over to her. The crowd watched, breath held. When he reached her, he offered his arm. "Walk with me," he said quietly. She nodded, slipping her hand into the crook of his arm. The moment was small, bare, but it roared louder than any declaration, and as they passed by Lady Callista, Eleanor caught the exact moment Callista's eyes narrowed. Dinner was a blur. Roasted pheasant, candied carrots, wine, which Eleanor declined politely. Conversation that swirled like smoke, about weather, war, land taxes, shifter territory disputes. Alaric did not speak much, but when he did, the table fell silent. His voice was a weapon, and his hand, shockingly, remained on the back of Eleanor's chair the entire time. It was barely there, but it was there. Callista spoke often, and always loud enough for Eleanor to hear. "Oh, I remember how well Alaric used to fence," she said airily, sipping from her glass. "So precise, so dominant. You haven't lost your touch, have you?" "No," he replied without looking at her. "But I no longer spar with women." A chuckle ran through the table. Callista blushed, and Eleanor, for the first time in her life, nearly smiled at another woman's embarrassment. After dinner, the guests wandered into the parlor for brandy and music. Eleanor declined the offer to sit at the pianoforte, claiming fatigue, and retreated to the conservatory, her favorite space in the entire estate, a glass room filled with winter roses, warmed with magic stones embedded in the floor. The night sky twinkled above, and snowflakes dusted the glass like sugar. She curled up on the bench beside the rose trellis and sighed. "You hide well." Eleanor looked up, startled. Lady Callista stepped into the room, gown trailing behind her like frost. She was smiling, but it wasn't kind. Eleanor stood slowly. "I wasn't hiding." "Of course not." Callista walked toward her, circling like a wolf. "I imagine it must be exhausting playing fragile all the time, though I must say, it works on him." "I'm not playing anything," Eleanor said gently. "Oh, darling," Callista purred. "You think a night of drunken coupling and a lucky womb makes you a wife? You don't belong in his world. I belong in his home, and I carry his children." Callista's face twitched, just once. Eleanor swallowed. Her fingers trembled at her side, but she didn't back away. "You had your chance," she whispered. "He didn't choose you." Callista sneered. "No, but he didn't love you either." Eleanor's eyes fell. "No, he didn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But he protected her. And these children were hers. They were enough." Still, something in Callista's words burrowed into her chest like a splinter. Because even if she had Alaric's name and his protection, she didn't have the one thing her foolish heart longed for most: his affection. Later that night, Alaric found her standing in the conservatory again. She didn't hear him at first, until his shadow stretched across the rose-laced floor. "I wondered where you'd gone." "I like it here," she said softly. "It's quiet and warm." He moved closer, coat unbuttoned, his sleeves rolled. He'd removed the formal mask of the evening, and for a moment he looked just like a man, a tired man. "I saw Callista speaking to you," he said. "What did she say?" Eleanor hesitated. "She reminded me I don't belong in your world." Alaric's expression darkened. "Did she threaten you?" "No." Eleanor looked up at him. "But she's right. I don't belong." He stepped forward. "You do. She loves you. She doesn't know me." "And I do?" Eleanor whispered. "Do I even know you, Alaric?" A pause. "No," he said honestly, "but I want you to." Her breath hitched. He looked down at her gently swelling stomach. "May I?" he asked. She nodded, and he knelt again, palms resting on either side of her waist as he leaned close. He stayed that way for a moment, silent, reverent, until he pressed his lips gently against her bump. It wasn't romantic. Not entirely. It was real. "I don't love easily," he said softly. "But I don't lie. And you're not nothing to me, Eleanor." She placed her hand in his hair. That was enough. For now. Chapter 6. It snowed overnight. Not a gentle dusting, but a deep, blanketing storm that swept over the Duke's estate like a silken shroud. By morning every window revealed a world erased in white, fields, forests, rooftops, all smoothed over as if the sky had tried to hush the world itself. The kitchen hearths burned hot and bright, maids wore extra shawls as they bustled with kettles and trays, and the scent of cinnamon, roasted nuts, and wood smoke drifted through the halls. Eleanor, however, stood at her bedroom window, in only her shift and robe, her hands folded under her bump. She watched the snow in silence, fogging the glass with her breath. Her room was warm, thanks to the hidden runes under the floors, but her fingers stayed cold. She hadn't slept much. Alaric's words from the night before echoed in her chest. "You're not nothing to me." It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't even affection. Not really. But from a man like the Duke of Rivermont, stoic, cold, brutal with his silence, it had been everything. She pressed her fingertips to the window. The garden below was dusted like a cake with powdered sugar. The roses in the conservatory were encased in a layer of frost. And then, faintly, flutter. Eleanor froze. A strange sensation, low and soft, brushed her from inside, like bubbles, or a whisper. Flutter. Her hand flew to her belly. "Babies?" she whispered. Her voice trembled. Was that you?" And again, like butterfly wings brushing against her skin from within, another flutter. Then two. She gasped, tears spilling instantly. They were moving. Her babies, his babies, were moving. She spun from the window, threw on her thick shawl and slippers, and half ran from the room, her feet pattering down the corridor. She didn't even know where he was. He hadn't joined her for breakfast, but she searched every room in the West Wing until, at last, she found him. In the library. The Duke was standing beside a long window, one hand holding an open letter, his brow furrowed in the morning light. He wore only a dark shirt, tucked into riding trousers, his long coat draped across the nearby chair. When he heard the door open, he turned, and his face changed. "Eleanor?" She crossed the threshold breathless, hair tumbling down from its braid. Forgive me," she said, suddenly shy. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I had to come." He blinked. "Is something wrong?" No, it's just..." She stepped closer, clutching her shawl. "The babies..." They moved. A pause. Alaric's eyes lowered to her bump. "Moved?" She nodded, tears still glimmering. "Just now. I felt them. I wanted to tell you first. I thought you might like to feel it too." He was silent for a moment. Then very slowly he walked to her. Eleanor expected him to hesitate, to stop short or hold back. But instead, he dropped to one knee without a word, just as he had before. His large hands reached up, reverent and careful, and cradled either side of her small belly. She watched him, his sharp profile, the scar on his temple, the way his brows knitted slightly as he waited. And then, there. A kick, a brush, a tiny movement. His hand stiffened. "There," Eleanor breathed. "Did you feel that?" He nodded slowly. Another movement. A flutter near his left palm. His jaw clenched. "They're strong," she whispered. "Just like their father." Alaric didn't look up. He didn't smile. But he bowed his head, pressing his forehead softly against her bump. And in that quiet, snow-muted library, Eleanor placed her trembling fingers in his hair, gently, as if not to break the moment. The storm worsened by midday. Servants drew thick curtains, lit extra candelabras, and began preparing the estate for the reality that no one was leaving, or arriving, any time soon. Eleanor spent the morning writing letters to her cousin Beatrice, sipping broth, and walking the inner courtyard paths bundled in layers. But by early evening Mila insisted she rest, and Eleanor retreated to the grand sitting room with embroidery and tea. To her surprise, Alaric joined her, not with papers, not with military maps, just himself, and a chessboard. She blinked as he set it up. "You play?" he asked casually, as if they did this often. I know the rules," she said timidly, "but I'm not very good. We'll see." They played 3 rounds. She lost all 3. The first, because she was too distracted by how close he sat. The second, because he captured her queen in 5 moves. The third, because he actually smirked when she tried to trap his knight, and the expression on his face ruined her concentration entirely. "You're toying with me," she said with a small pout, his brow lifted. "Would you prefer I let you win?" "No." She crossed her arms. "I want to earn it." His gaze softened a fraction. "You will. he said, and began setting the board again. Eventually, that night, with the snow still falling in thick, wet silence, Eleanor stepped out of her bath and wrapped herself in warm linens. Mila helped her into a soft cotton nightgown and combed her hair out in long, careful strokes. "Do you think he's changing?" Eleanor asked quietly. Mila's strokes slowed. "Men like him don't change, milady," she said carefully. "But they bend, if the right woman gives them reason." Eleanor smiled faintly. "I don't think I'm strong enough to bend anyone." "You're stronger than you know." Later, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The snow made the world feel too quiet. The twins were active again, and every kick stirred both awe and ache. She pressed a warm cloth to her stomach, trying to soothe the tiny dancers within, but it wasn't enough. So, wrapping her robe around herself, she slipped from her chambers. The west wing was dim. Candles glowed in their sconces, painting golden shadows along the stone walls. Her slippers were nearly silent on the runner rugs. She paused before Alaric's door, just for a moment. Then, with a breath, she knocked. A pause. Then, "Enter." She pushed the door open. Alaric was sitting beside the fire, in a shirt and trousers, his hair damp from a bath. A brandy glass rested in one hand, and a book lay closed on the table beside him. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "No." She stepped in, hesitating only a little. "The babies are kicking. A lot." He stood instantly. "Are you in pain?" "No, no." She smiled gently. "They're just awake. And I thought maybe I could sit with you." He didn't answer immediately, but he stepped aside, motioning to the second armchair beside the fire. She sank into it gratefully, resting her palms on her bump. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, just soft. "Did they kick again?" he asked after a while. She nodded. "They like the sound of your voice." Alaric's mouth curved only slightly. "I don't talk much. They still know you." Another kick. She winced and shifted. "Oh, sorry. One of them is especially rowdy tonight." He reached out, slowly, gently, and touched her stomach again. Barely a brush. "Perhaps a future alpha," he murmured. "Or two," she said. "Twins do run in my family." His brows rose. "You're certain it's two?" I feel like it is." She looked down. "I know it's not a proper diagnosis, but I just know." He didn't argue. Instead, he stayed kneeling at her feet, both hands on her belly, head bowed like she was something sacred. Eleanor's throat tightened. She reached for him, just a little, and touched his cheek. He looked up. And for the first time since their drunken wedding night, something in the air between them shifted. Not passion, not hunger, something far more dangerous. Hope. Chapter 7. The snow did not let up for 3 days. Eleanor spent most of it nestled between warmth and silence, the crackling of the hearth echoing in her ears, and the soft, steady movements of the twins offering quiet companionship. In the stillness of the storm, the great Duke of Rivermont had become softer somehow. No less cold in speech but quieter in his storm, less bristling, more present. He no longer avoided her. He even occasionally sought her out. They shared quiet meals together. Never too long, never romantic. But they lingered now. He sometimes poured her tea himself, sometimes asked how the babies were doing. He didn't smile, not really, but something in his expression grew less hollow when she was near, and she, foolishly, treasured every scrap of attention he offered. Even if he still hadn't touched her again since that first drunken night, even if he hadn't kissed her once. She had no illusions. Eleanor never had. She was not beautiful. She was not clever with words, nor witty in company. She could barely hold eye contact for more than a few seconds. But she loved with every thread of her being, and something in her still believed that even the iciest of men might soften. Eventually, if shown warmth enough. Even this cold-hearted Duke, even if she had to be patient until her dying breath. On the 4th morning, the snow finally stopped. Sunlight poured in through the high windows, turning the white world silver. Servants scurried through the halls to clear the paths and prepare the stables, and messengers who'd been trapped by the storm arrived shivering with delayed letters. Eleanor was in the nursery wing, choosing colors for the future children's rooms, even if they were months from being born, when Mila rushed in, breathless and pink-cheeked. "A letter's come for you, my lady, from your cousin in the capital." Eleanor turned from the pale blue fabric she'd been admiring. "Beatrice?" Mila nodded, holding out the envelope. The seal was cracked and slightly damp, the parchment bearing the faint smell of lavender. Eleanor unfolded it with trembling fingers. "Dearest Eleanor, I hope this letter finds you well, and warm, for the snow here has been dreadful. I imagine you've heard nothing from court in weeks. So I write not only to send you my love, but also to warn you, your name is on every tongue. The Duke's surprise marriage to a country mouse, as they're calling you, has scandalized the ton. And worse, some are saying you trapped him, that your pregnancy was a ploy. A few more cruel ones are suggesting the children aren't even his. I'm so sorry, dearest. I know you would never do such a thing. But court is a viper's nest, and I fear what may come next. There are whispers the Queen may request an audience. If so, you must be ready." With all my heart, Beatrice Eleanor folded the letter slowly, her hands trembling. Beatrice had always written with flair, but the tone of this letter chilled her more than the snow ever could. She wasn't just warning her of gossip, she was warning her of danger. The Queen was a formidable woman, beautiful, calculating, fond of her courtly order. And Alaric, Eleanor knew, had never been her favorite noble. He held too much land, too much power, too many secrets. Eleanor pressed a hand to her belly. The twins shifted, as if sensing her unease. "Mila," she said softly, "can you help me find the Duke?" Alaric was in the war room as usual, surrounded by maps and correspondence. The room smelled of ink, candle wax, and cold steel. When Eleanor was announced, he looked up from his desk, but he did not frown. "Come in." She stepped softly across the stone floor, the letter clutched in both hands. Her voice was steady, but her heart thudded like thunder in her chest. "I received word from my cousin Beatrice. In the capital." He gestured for her to sit. She remained standing. "She says the court is talking about us," Eleanor said, her voice quieter now. "About me, about the twins." Alaric's jaw flexed. "Let them talk." She blinked. "What?" "Gossip is wind, Eleanor. It howls and then it dies. But the Queen may summon me." At that, his gaze sharpened. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he stood and crossed to her. "You will not be summoned like a servant," he said firmly. "You are my wife. No one commands you but me." The words sent a strange thrill through her, possessive, protective, and still slightly cold. But it was a shield. That was more than she'd ever had. "And if she insists?" Eleanor asked. "Will you present me to court?" Alaric turned his back to her, pacing toward the window. Snow had begun melting off the panes, revealing the gray winter garden beyond. "You don't belong in that world," he said after a beat. "They will tear you apart." Her voice cracked. "Then teach me." He looked over his shoulder, eyes narrowing. "What?" "Teach me," she repeated, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "If I must be seen, if I must be your wife in more than name, then I must be ready. I don't want to embarrass you." He turned fully then. His expression was unreadable. "You think I'd be embarrassed by you?" Eleanor lowered her gaze. "You've barely touched me since our wedding night." The silence stretched. "I thought you didn't want me," she added softly. "Not really. And now with everyone watching." She broke off. She hadn't meant to say all that. Not aloud, not to him. But Alaric was already crossing the room again. His footsteps were soft on the rugs, but there was tension in his frame, something coiled, sharp, dangerous. He stopped in front of her. "Eleanor," he said, voice low, "I don't touch things I'm afraid of breaking." Her breath hitched. Then, "I'm that fragile to you, you're that precious." He took her hand, slowly, carefully, as though she might shatter in his palm. "If you want to be presented at court," he said, "you will not go as a timid wife in the shadow of a scandal. You'll go as the Duchess of Rivermont, my equal, my bride." Tears blurred her eyes. "And I will make it very clear," he said coldly, "that the twins are mine. Anyone who says otherwise will answer to me." He didn't kiss her, but he lifted her hand to his mouth and pressed it to his lips. It was more than a kiss. It was a vow. And Eleanor, standing there trembling in the war room of her ruthless husband, realized for the first time that she might not have to chase his heart alone. Maybe, just maybe, he'd begun chasing hers too. Chapter 8. The news came the very next morning. A royal carriage, navy blue with golden trim, bearing the royal crest of House Vendale, arrived at Rivermont with a sealed summons from the capital. The Queen would see the Duke and Duchess within the fortnight. It wasn't a request, it was an order, wrapped in politeness, gilded with decorum, but sharp and absolute in its meaning. And Alaric's response was swift. He didn't rant, He didn't curse. He simply burned the parchment in the fireplace, stood in silence as it crumbled to ash, and said, "So be it." But for Eleanor, something shifted. Gone was the illusion that she had time, that her place in Alaric's world could remain quiet, safely tucked away in the cold northern halls of Rivermont. The court would see her, judge her, decide her fate. She was not ready, not even remotely. That evening, she was summoned to Alaric's private study. The long corridor leading to it was candlelit and hushed, and her slippers made soft sounds against the ancient rug as she was led forward by one of the Duke's footmen. When she entered, he was already seated behind his desk, dressed in a black velvet doublet, silver trim catching the light. A decanter of dark liquor sat on a tray beside him, but his glass was untouched. He looked up as she entered. "You said you wished to learn." Eleanor nodded, fingers curled tightly together. "Yes. Then your tutor arrives at dawn." Her eyes widened. "A tutor?" Alaric stood and walked to the window, his silhouette framed by the frosted panes and the moonlight. "I could teach you to read a map, Eleanor, to navigate court politics like battlefields. But you'll need more than that." She hesitated. "Who is she?" He turned slowly, the shadows slicing across his cheekbone like armor. "Lady Geneva Marwood." Eleanor's heart plummeted. "I thought she was your—" He nodded once. She was. His former betrothed, the woman the court had expected him to marry for years. The one said to have once held his affections, if the Duke of Rivermont was capable of affection at all. "She'll prepare you for the capital," Alaric said. "How to speak, how to carry yourself, how to endure them all without flinching." Eleanor's mouth had gone dry. "Will she be kind?" "No," he said flatly. "But she will be honest, and that's more useful." Lady Geneva Marwood arrived before sunrise the next morning. Her carriage was smaller than the royal one, but far sleeker, steel gray and trimmed in sable. She stepped down without assistance, her gloved hand gripping a silver walking cane more for dramatic flair than necessity. She was a striking woman, not beautiful in a soft or yielding way, but in a blade-sharp, burnished steel sort of way. Her honey-gold hair was braided up in an elaborate crown, her lips painted the color of crushed roses, and her dark gray gown hugged her figure like a second skin. A silver wolf pin gleamed at her collar. Eleanor was waiting at the top of the stairs. She curtsied, deep and respectful. "Lady Marwood," she said softly. Geneva surveyed her with a gaze so cutting it could have split glass. "So," she said coolly, "this is the mouse who became a duchess." Eleanor blushed scarlet. I suppose I am. Geneva ascended the stairs without breaking stride. "We begin in 1 hour. Wear something that fits." Their first lesson took place in the ballroom, a room Eleanor had avoided entirely until now, afraid of its towering mirrors and polished floors, the echo of her own breath too loud in the vast space. Geneva stood in the center like a general surveying her battlefield. "First lesson," she said. "Posture. You slouch like a girl born in a barn." Eleanor flushed. "I was born on a farm." "That," Geneva said, "is not an excuse. Royal courtiers will find it charming until they smell blood in the water." She circled Eleanor with slow, deliberate steps, chin up, back straight. "No, not like you're bracing for a blow, like you're daring them to strike you." Eleanor tried, and failed. Geneva sighed. "Your biggest weapon is not beauty, not wit, certainly not power, it's innocence. You look like someone who could weep over a daffodil. Use that, let them underestimate you. But won't they think I'm weak?" Geneva smiled, a rare and lethal thing. "They'll think you're soft, not weak, until you smile at them while slicing their reputation open with a compliment." The lessons continued for days. Geneva taught her everything: how to walk in heeled slippers without stumbling, how to answer an insult with a gentle smile and a razor-sharp retort, how to hold a wineglass so daintily it made other women furious. She corrected Eleanor's stammer gently but firmly, made her recite poetry with her hand pressed flat to her diaphragm, had her repeat noble titles until Eleanor could list every ranking in descending order without blinking. "You are not merely Alaric's wife," she said during one particularly brutal lesson. "You are a duchess of the realm. The capital will not forget that. Don't let them." Through it all, Eleanor never raised her voice, never protested. She tried harder, worked longer, bruised her feet, bled through her slippers, cried alone in the bath. But she never gave up, because for once someone believed she could be more. Even if that someone was Geneva, Even if Alaric still hadn't kissed her since the wedding, even if she was carrying his children and he barely looked at her with softness. Eleanor believed in love, in kindness, in endurance, and she would not walk into the capital looking like a frightened girl with trembling hands and swollen ankles. She would walk in looking like his bride. Even if he never truly wanted her. One evening, after a particularly long lesson, Eleanor found herself alone in the music room. Her fingers drifted over the dusty keys of the pianoforte, and for the first time since arriving at Rivermont, she played a gentle lullaby. Soft, fragile, old as the hills. She didn't realize she had an audience until the song ended. Alaric stood in the doorway. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then, that song. My mother used to play it. Eleanor turned. Her cheeks were pink and her belly, rounded now with life, shifted beneath her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to intrude. You didn't." Another long pause. "You're improving," he added. "Geneva says so." Eleanor smiled faintly. She doesn't say much kindly, no. But she doesn't waste time either. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat something cracked between them. "I never thanked you," she said softly, "for protecting me. From the court, from the queen. From what they're saying." Alaric stepped closer. "You're carrying my children. That's not the only reason, is it?" He didn't answer. But he didn't leave either. Instead, he reached for her hand, not roughly, not possessively, but with something like reverence. And she let him. For the first time in weeks, Eleanor felt it, not love, not yet, but something blooming beneath the frost, something waiting. And she prayed that one day he would feel it too. Chapter 9. The journey to the capital took 5 days. 5 days of snow-laced valleys and winding river roads. 5 days of chilled air and horse-drawn silence. 5 days of Eleanor seated across from Alaric in the velvet-lined confines of the royal carriage, her hands trembling in her lap and her eyes fixed on the passing landscape, gray skies, frostbitten forests and hills where wild wolves once roamed free. But none of it was as wild as the thoughts racing in her mind. She would meet the queen. She would be judged, not only as a duchess but as a woman unfit for the Duke of Rivermont. Her background, her meekness, her softness, everything she was would be stripped bare and examined under the crown's gaze. And worse still, Geneva would be there, not only as her tutor, but as the woman who once sat where she now sat. The woman who had been meant to be Alaric's wife. The woman who, at least once, must have known what it meant to be close to him. Truly close. Eleanor didn't hate her. She didn't have the courage for that. But something inside her twisted painfully at the thought. The capital came into view like a jewel half hidden by storm clouds. Caer Thorne, ancient, sprawling, stone-paved and iron-gated, with its banners snapping like wolves' teeth in the wind and the tall towers of the palace casting long shadows over the city's heart. The palace itself was a thing of cold majesty. Gray walls laced with ivy, windows tall as cathedral glass, and a grand courtyard brimming with noblemen and their wives, all turned toward the arriving carriages like vultures scenting a fresh kill. As Eleanor stepped down, her gloved hand in Alaric's, she felt the weight of hundreds of eyes. Her pale blue gown, chosen carefully by Geneva, fluttered around her ankles like the petals of a spring blossom caught in a winter gale. Her hair was pinned in a soft updo, her features touched lightly with rouge. She looked delicate, almost too delicate for the stone beneath her slippers. But her back was straight, her chin lifted. Let them whisper, she told herself. Let them sneer. She would walk beside the coldest man in the kingdom and not flinch. She would endure. Their rooms in the royal wing were vast and echoing, marble-floored, gold-accented, and cold in the way all royal places were cold. Too perfect, too sharp, too watchful. Alaric disappeared almost immediately into private council with the Queen's advisors, his presence requested for a matter of territorial conflict near the eastern border. That left Eleanor alone. Geneva joined her an hour later, dressed in a raven-black gown and looking utterly at ease among the palace's glittering halls. "The Queen will receive you tomorrow morning," she said, without preamble. "At tea. No servants, no guards, just you and Her Majesty." Eleanor nodded, pulse a frantic drumbeat beneath her skin. "And tonight?" she asked. Geneva's lips curved faintly. "Tonight is the Duke's welcome banquet. Nobility from all 13 provinces will attend. Expect to be judged, admired, ridiculed, and flirted with in equal measure. I'm no good at flirting. You're not meant to be, Geneva said, brushing invisible lint from Eleanor's shoulder. You're meant to remind them he chose you, and not because he had to. Eleanor hesitated. But he did have to. Geneva's eyes flicked to hers, sharp and strange and almost protective. They don't need to know that. The banquet was a sea of candlelight and silk. Gilded chandeliers bathed the ballroom in gold, music soared from a string quartet, and nobles glided across the floor like predators wrapped in perfume and velvet. Eleanor stood at the top of the stairs, arm looped through Alaric's. She could feel his tension like a wire pulled tight beneath his skin. You don't have to speak, he said softly, eyes on the crowd. Just nod. Smile. Let them think what they want. Eleanor nodded, but not because she agreed. Because this was her test, her debut. Her moment to prove that she wasn't just a mistake sewn into silk and forced to smile. As they descended the stairs, the crowd parted slowly. Dozens of noblewomen tilted their heads in inspection. Men offered shallow bows, many followed by lingering glances that slid too low. Courtiers whispered behind jeweled fans. But Eleanor didn't wilt. She held her place beside Alaric, smiled softly when spoken to, and answered in the gentle, precise voice Geneva had helped her shape. Duchess Eleanor, one baroness purred, draped in sapphire and smugness, such a fragile little thing. I dare say you'll break before spring. Eleanor smiled. Spring always favors the roots that survive winter, my lady. The baroness blinked. Geneva, standing nearby, raised an approving brow. Eleanor glided past. But the true blow came later. Just as the third course of supper was being served, a hush fell over the ballroom, and a single name was whispered like a crack of thunder. Lord Thorne. Eleanor's heart stopped. The man approaching was tall, broad-shouldered, with curling gold hair and a grin too lazy to be honest. He was dressed in dark crimson, and his eyes glinted like warm brandy, mischievous and amused. Geneva stiffened beside Eleanor. Who is that? Eleanor whispered. Geneva's lips thinned. Alaric's cousin, first heir to House Thorne, and the last man you should ever be left alone with. Lord Thorne approached them directly, bowing low to Eleanor with a flourish of aristocratic arrogance. My lady, he said, voice as smooth as honey and twice as sticky. So you're the lamb who's tamed the wolf. Eleanor curtsied. Hardly tamed. Oh, modest, too. Alaric's taste has changed. Alaric appeared beside her before Thorne could continue, jaw tight. Walk away, Vincent. Lord Thorne smirked. Jealousy doesn't suit you, cousin. I'm not jealous, Alaric said coldly. I'm warning you. Thorne tilted his head toward Eleanor. If ever you grow tired of shadows, my lady, come find me. I can offer warmth and laughter. Alaric's hand tightened around Eleanor's waist. She didn't move. She didn't look at Thorne again, because something had flickered in Alaric's touch. Possession, not duty, not protectiveness. Something darker, something deeper. She glanced up at him, but his expression was unreadable. Still, he didn't let go until the last song was played. That night, as the palace slept, Eleanor lay awake in her enormous bed, hand resting gently over the curve of her belly. She was changing, not in power, not in voice, but in belief. Perhaps meekness wasn't weakness. Perhaps softness was not something to hide, but something to endure with. And perhaps the cold Duke of Rivermont was beginning to see it too, even if he could not say it yet. Even if the world would never let him. Chapter 10. Tea with the Queen. The sky was pale and colorless when Eleanor rose, a white-gray morning, the kind that softened the edges of things and wrapped the palace in a hush. But nothing about this morning was soft, not for her, not when every step toward the Queen's solar felt like walking into a den of wolves. She stood in front of the mirror while Geneva gently tied the final ribbon beneath her bust, emphasizing the delicate curve of her pregnancy, still subtle, but now unmistakable to the trained eye. At just over 2 months, her body was changing slowly. The heaviness in her chest, the way her gowns fit tighter, the sudden swings of nausea and fatigue. She was learning her new shape, and learning how to carry it with grace. Geneva placed a hand on her shoulder. You look radiant, Eleanor gave a thin smile. I feel like I might faint. You won't, Geneva said with quiet certainty. She'll try to unsettle you. Don't let her. You are the Duchess of Rivermont. And you are carrying the heir of a major house. That makes you powerful, even if you don't feel it. Eleanor took a long breath, smoothing the soft ivory of her gown. She didn't feel powerful. She felt like a girl in too fine a dress, with the weight of a kingdom pressing against her ribs. But she nodded, and walked. The Queen's solar was high in the east wing of the palace, quiet and filled with light. The guards outside did not speak as Eleanor passed between them, and the double doors opened with a sound like thunder. She stepped into a room of tapestries and painted silk. And the Queen. Queen Adeline was not what Eleanor expected. She was small, slight, and graying at the temples. Her hair was coiled tightly into a bun, her features narrow and intelligent. She did not wear a crown, only a high-collared gown of silver brocade and a brooch in the shape of a wolf's head. Her gaze, when it settled on Eleanor, was sharp enough to slice. There were no attendants, no music, just 2 chairs, a tea service, and silence. "You're early," the Queen said simply, motioning toward the seat across from her. Eleanor curtsied low, then sat carefully, mindful of the pressure on her abdomen. "I was taught that promptness is respectful." The Queen poured tea, her movements precise. "And yet you married my nephew without so much as an introduction. Forgive me if I find that informal." Eleanor did not flinch. "I didn't expect the marriage either, Your Majesty, but you accepted it." "I had no choice." The Queen looked up slowly. Eleanor met her gaze. A long, brittle silence passed between them, broken only by the gentle clink of porcelain as the Queen set down her cup. "And now you carry his child." A statement, not a question. "Yes. You understand what that means." "I do." "Do you?" The Queen's voice was low, but it held iron. "You are carrying the heir to a dukedom that controls 1/3 of the southern provinces. Do you know how many noble houses would kill for that seat?" Eleanor's throat tightened. "I never asked for any of this." "No," the Queen said coolly, "but you have it. And that means you will be watched. You will be whispered about. Every word you say, every gesture you make, will echo through court like a drumbeat." Eleanor's hand slipped instinctively to her belly. "I only want to protect them." At that, something flickered across the Queen's face. Surprise. Or perhaps memory. "You mean the twins?" Eleanor blinked. "You know?" The Queen sipped her tea. "The royal physicians examined your charts when the news was confirmed. Twins are rare, particularly in noble lines. You are valuable, Eleanor. To him, to the court, to enemies you haven't yet met." Eleanor's breath caught. She looked down. "I don't know how to be what everyone expects." "Good," the Queen said abruptly. "Then you won't try to please them. That's a mistake women like us cannot afford." Eleanor looked up again, surprised. The Queen's voice softened, only slightly. "You're quiet, gentle. That will be used against you. They'll call you fragile, weak, stupid. But if you survive this court, you will learn the greatest strength there is, endurance. And if you raise those twins to understand that, if you stay the way you are, kind but unbending, then you will have won." Silence settled again, but this time it was different. The Queen refilled her cup. "Have you chosen names?" Eleanor blinked, caught off guard by the question. No. I've thought of them. I have a journal. I suggest you begin thinking in titles," the Queen said. "Your child may one day be Duke or Duchess. Names carry weight." Eleanor nodded, fingers nervously brushing her lap. The Queen rose. The meeting was over, but as Eleanor stood to leave, the Queen said, almost in passing, "Alaric was a cold boy. Cold men come from cold families. You are not what I expected, Eleanor of the Riverlands, but you may be what he needs." Eleanor stepped out into the corridor with trembling hands and something strange blooming in her chest. It wasn't victory, not exactly, but it wasn't failure either. The Queen had seen her, not as a mistake, not as a scandal, but as something else entirely. Later that evening, Alaric returned from his council meetings, wearier than usual, coat dusted with snow. He entered their shared quarters without knocking, and paused when he saw her seated by the hearth, writing in her journal. He stood there for a long moment, saying nothing. Finally, "She didn't eat you alive." "No," Eleanor said, voice soft but steady. "She poured tea." "And threatened me." Politely. He smirked faintly, shrugging off his coat. "That's her way. I think I liked her." Alaric poured himself a drink. She never liked Geneva. Eleanor looked up. Why not? She said Geneva wanted power too much. That she would have eaten me alive. Eleanor looked back at the fire. She thinks I'm something else. Alaric turned, expression unreadable. You are. A long pause. And then Eleanor almost whispering, Do you want this, Alaric? This life? This marriage? This child? The air thickened. Alaric didn't look away. I don't know what I want. But you don't regret me? No. A silence full of breath and unsaid things passed between them, and Eleanor nodded. That night, they slept in the same bed. Not touching, not yet, but closer than before, and somewhere in the dark, with her back to his chest and his arm barely grazing hers, Eleanor whispered names to herself in the silence. Names that might one day belong to the twins whose hearts beat beneath hers. She didn't need to be strong. She only needed to endure. And for the first time, she believed she could. Chapter 11. The palace had taken on a kind of stillness since the Queen's tea. Not in the literal sense. The servants still bustled, carriages still came and went, and noblewomen still gossiped behind gloved hands. But around Eleanor and Alaric there was a suspended quiet. A waiting. It had been 2 days since that night they shared a bed. Not a touch. Not a kiss. But still shared. The snow had deepened. Icicles clung like daggers from the eaves of the windows. Eleanor stood at the tall panes of their chamber wrapped in a fur-lined shawl, a book cradled in her hands. She hadn't read a word. Alaric was writing at the desk, always writing, reports, letters, requests from provinces under his rule. She watched the curve of his hand, the way his fingers gripped the quill so tightly it looked like war, not words. She bit her lip and turned away. Her stomach was fluttery again, part nerves, part pregnancy, and part him. This man she'd been forced to marry. This man whose children, grew inside her. This man who, for all his silence and sharpness, had begun to linger. At meals, in conversation, in her presence. Yesterday he had passed her a plate of sugared fruit without being asked. His hand had brushed hers. He hadn't flinched. Today, she was waiting for that moment again. Would you like some tea? She asked, her voice nearly a whisper. Alaric looked up, clearly surprised. Eleanor flushed, fiddling with her shawl. I can ring for it. They bring ginger tea for my stomach. I thought perhaps... Yes, he said suddenly, closing the distance with a few slow strides. I would. He stood beside her, close, too close. Her breath caught. He looked down at her. Not her stomach, not her hands, her. Thank you, he added more quietly. You're always thinking of others. Eleanor shook her head shyly. Not always. His lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but a shift. She moved to the bell pull, but his hand reached out, fingers brushing her wrist before she could touch the cord. The contact froze her in place, so warm, so real. He pulled back immediately. Forgive me. No, she whispered. You startled me. He stepped back. That wasn't my intention. I know. A quiet fell over them again, this one different. More like mist than ice. He turned back to the desk, but his steps were slower now, measured. Watching. Would you like to go walking? She asked suddenly, surprising even herself. He paused, turning his head slightly. In the snow? It's not heavy today. There's a path around the east gardens. The snow hasn't settled too deeply. He raised a brow. A walk. With me. Eleanor lowered her gaze, cheeks burning. It's fine. You're busy. I don't mean to. I didn't say no. She blinked. His eyes softened just slightly. Let me get my coat. The garden path was silent, but for the crunch of their boots. It was surrounded by hedges, now dusted in thick white. Trees were bare, but still tall and elegant, arching over the trail like cathedral spires. The wind was gentle, a soft whisper, and above them the clouds were beginning to part for a pale blue sky. Alaric walked beside her. Not ahead, not behind. Beside. Eleanor kept a hand gently over her belly as they strolled, the layers of her cloak wrapping around her middle. I was told the East Gardens were designed by a foreign queen, she said quietly. Each tree imported from her homeland. Queen Illyria, Alaric answered. My great-grandmother. She came from the North Sea Isles. Hated it here at first. Said the trees made her homesick. So she brought her trees with her, Eleanor said, eyes soft. She never went home, he added, voice quiet. There was a long pause. Eleanor glanced up at him. "Do you hate it too?" He looked surprised. "The palace? No, this, marriage, me." He stopped walking. Her heart thudded in the silence. Finally he said, "I hated the idea of it." She looked away. "But you are not the idea." That made her look back up. I don't know what to do with you," he admitted, almost awkwardly. "You're not like them. Like Geneva? Like anyone." He stepped closer, his voice low. "I expected bitterness, anger. You were forced to marry me, forced to carry my child, forced to become the center of scandal. But you're soft, still, even now." She smiled faintly. "I was raised to believe love matters more than pride. That's foolish." "I know," she said, "but I still believe it." He stared at her for a long moment. Then, hesitantly, he reached out and touched her cheek. The touch was so gentle it almost broke her. "I'm trying," he whispered. She leaned into his hand. "So am I." They didn't kiss, not yet. But his hand didn't leave her face, and her eyes didn't leave his. The cold didn't seem to matter anymore. That night he returned to their chambers early. Eleanor was reading in bed. She looked up as he entered, candlelight flickering across her pale skin. He unfastened his coat, removed his boots, then stood there, awkwardly, beside the bed. "Would you mind if I—" He gestured toward the sheets. She shifted, lifting the cover silently. He climbed in beside her. They did not touch, but they lay close enough that his breath stirred her hair, and slowly, in the quiet, she reached for his hand. She placed it over her stomach. He stilled. 2 heartbeats later, his fingers curled gently against her skin. A silent vow neither of them spoke aloud, but both of them felt. Chapter 12. The days that followed moved with the slow, silken rhythm of winter, quiet, padded in snow, and somehow suspended in time. But in their shared chamber, something was beginning to stir. It began in whispers, not of words, of gestures. Eleanor had grown used to his presence, accustomed to the weight of his coat hung beside hers, the scrape of his boots beside the hearth. But nothing prepared her for how quickly her heart stammered every time his hand brushed hers across the breakfast table, or how her breath hitched when his gaze lingered on her lips longer than necessary. And now, they shared a bed every night. Alaric had not touched her, not in any way that crossed propriety. But every evening he would remove his armor, his figurative one, she thought more than the real, and lie beside her. They wouldn't speak. Not at first, but their hands would find each other under the thick covers, and his thumb would trace gentle circles across her knuckles. He never let go first. Tonight, however, was different. Eleanor sat at her vanity, combing her long chestnut hair out of its braid. A soft fire crackled in the hearth, and a single candle burned beside her. Her reflection showed pink cheeks, full lips slightly parted, and wide, innocent eyes that betrayed the rush in her chest. She wasn't imagining it. He was changing, softening, for her. The door creaked behind her. She didn't turn. She saw him in the mirror, dark tunic, trousers, no jacket, barefoot, and bare of expression as always. But his eyes, they looked hungry, not in a lustful way, something deeper, something that needed. "May I?" he asked softly, motioning to her hairbrush. She blinked. "You—" He stepped closer. "My mother used to let me brush her hair when I was a boy." It calmed her. Her throat tightened. She offered the brush silently. He took it from her hand, and the feel of his fingers made her shiver. "Sit still," he murmured. He gathered a section of her hair with trembling hands. Long, slow strokes followed, from root to tip, gentle, reverent. Eleanor closed her eyes. Each pass was like a confession, a stroke of something unnamed blooming between them. "I heard you humming earlier," he said after a while. I didn't realize. It was sweet." She smiled faintly. "I used to hum to the garden roses when I was little. I thought it helped them bloom. It probably did." Another stroke. Her lashes fluttered. "I want to ask something of you," he said, voice lower now. She opened her eyes, heart beginning to beat faster. He set the brush down. Her hair fell around her shoulders like a curtain. Then he bent, slowly, cautiously, and pressed a kiss to the crown of her head. It broke something inside her. When she turned to face him, her eyes were wide and wet. He cupped her cheek. "Let me hold you tonight," he whispered. "Just hold you." She nodded, breathless. They climbed into bed together, but this time, he didn't lie apart. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, drew her in, cradling her head against his chest. His hand rested on the gentle swell of her belly. The twins were beginning to move faintly now, small kicks fluttering like whispers. He felt it, his fingers twitched. Eleanor looked up at him. He was still staring at her stomach. "Does it feel real yet?" she asked. "No," he admitted, "but it feels like something I want to protect." She reached up and traced the line of his jaw. He turned into her hand slowly. "You make me want to be gentle," he said. "You already are," she whispered. "With me." He looked down at her, and something inside him finally gave way. He leaned in. Their lips met like silk and starlight, soft, hesitant, and incredibly tender. No heat, just warmth, deep and aching. He pulled back slowly, his forehead resting against hers. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered. "We don't have to rush," she said just as quietly. But then he kissed her again. Longer this time. His hand found her waist, anchoring her against him. She melted into him, her fingers curling into the linen of his shirt. Her breath caught when his mouth moved from her lips to her cheek, to her jaw, then back again, still soft, still restrained, but laced with a quiet desperation, like he was scared to let her go. When they finally broke apart, she was breathless. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, resting his palm against her flushed cheek. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see you. I was always here," she whispered. And that night, they didn't just share a bed. They slept in one another's arms. And neither woke up alone. Chapter 13. The castle was quiet. A hushed stillness had blanketed the long halls of Stonehearth after supper, the flickering sconces throwing soft shadows on the ancient stone walls. Snow whispered against the windows, and the faint howls of distant wolves echoed in the valley below. Eleanor stood by the hearth in their bedchamber, brushing her fingertips lightly over her belly. The fire painted her pale nightdress in hues of amber and gold, casting a gentle glow on the small curve of her pregnancy. She could feel them moving again, soft little kicks that fluttered like moth wings beneath her skin. She smiled faintly. They were real. She was really here, married, pregnant, and somehow not unloved. She looked over her shoulder as the door opened with a click. Alaric stepped inside, his dark cloak already unfastened, snow melting on his shoulders. He was quiet, as he always was. But his eyes found her immediately. They lingered. She turned fully toward him, her hands sliding down over her stomach. The firelight wrapped around her like silk. He swallowed once. "I heard you were in the solar with the cookmaids today," he said, removing his gloves. "They let me taste the blackberry jam for spring reserves," she replied, smiling. "Did you like it?" She nodded, lowering her eyes shyly. "I thought I might have craved it." He stilled at that word. Craved. Pregnancy was changing her, softening her already gentle edges into something glowing and maternal. And she, this small, timid woman, was beginning to shine with a warmth that made his cold iron chest ache. She looked up. "Would you stay a while?" she asked. His brow furrowed. "Stay?" "Tonight, I don't want to sleep with space between us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. A pause. Then, slowly, he walked toward her. He didn't speak, didn't touch her yet. He simply removed his outer layers until he stood before her in only a linen shirt and dark trousers, the firelight drawing gold onto his skin. She reached for him hesitantly, and her small fingers curled around the front of his shirt. "Do you want this?" she whispered. "I think about it every night." Her breath caught. He lifted her chin gently with 2 fingers, his touch reverent. "I've never known how to be tender," he said, "but for you, I want to learn." Then his lips met hers. It was not urgent, not harsh or dominant. It was gentle, tender, like falling snow. She melted under the warmth of it, her hands moving to his waist. His arms slid around her back, drawing her closer. Their bodies aligned, soft against firm, fragile against strong. He kissed her again, and her hands trembled as they slid up under his shirt, feeling the warmth of his skin. Alaric took a shaky breath and drew back just enough to search her face. Her eyes were wide, her cheeks flushed, her lips parted. "I won't rush you," he murmured. "I trust you," she whispered. So he led her gently to the bed. He moved slowly, helping her ease onto the mattress, settling the pillows behind her. His touch was careful, reverent, as if she might shatter. She looked so small in the center of the massive bed, her chest rising and falling quickly. Alaric undid the laces of her nightgown with trembling fingers. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch. She trusted him. When he slid the fabric from her shoulders, he paused, taking her in. She flushed, but didn't hide. Her belly, already blooming with life, rose gently from the curve of her hips, her breasts full and tender. She was the image of something sacred. "You're beautiful," he whispered, hoarse. She reached up for him. He joined her on the bed, slowly, letting her hands explore him as he kissed her again. Her neck, her collarbone, the soft slope of her shoulder. His hands moved reverently down her body, stopping just above her womb. "They're in there," he murmured, almost in awe. She smiled faintly and nodded, threading her fingers through his. And then, finally, he entered her. It was slow, exquisite, a quiet symphony of breath and warmth and movement. She gasped softly, her fingers digging into his arms, but he kissed away her whimpers. He moved slowly, deeply, never rushing, never pressing more than she gave. He held her like she was the most precious thing he'd ever touched. And for Eleanor it felt like she was unraveling, being seen and cherished and adored all at once. Her meekness never left her, not even in the most intimate moment of her life. But in his arms, she felt safe. And safe, for her, was the same as loved. Their bodies moved in quiet rhythm, firelight dancing across skin and shadows. When she came undone, it was with a soft cry, muffled against his shoulder. He followed moments later, burying his face against her neck as he trembled. They lay tangled afterward, the covers pulled over them, her cheek pressed to his chest. His hand rested protectively over her belly again, but now his fingers stroked lazily across the curve. Eleanor was still catching her breath when she whispered, "Did I do well?" Alaric froze. He leaned back and cupped her face. "You were incredible," he said, voice thick with emotion. She gave him a small, shy smile. "I didn't know it could feel like that. Neither did I." They stayed in silence for a long while. Then finally, "I want to be a good father," he murmured. "You will be. And a good husband." She placed a kiss over his heart. "You already are." That night they didn't sleep apart, and in the morning neither of them would pretend nothing had changed, because everything had, and neither wanted to go back. Chapter 14. The soft rays of dawn filtered through the velvet drapes of Stonehearth's master chambers. A thin winter sun broke the gray skies, scattering light across the high vaulted ceilings and warming the chilled air with a shy touch of spring. Eleanor awoke before Alaric. Her eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the gold-streaked morning light. For a moment, she remained still, wrapped in the heavy down blankets and the Duke's bare arm, which rested protectively over her waist. His body was a furnace behind her, chest pressed into her back, legs tangled with hers. She could feel the slow rise and fall of his breath against the curve of her neck. She let herself smile, small, secret, soft. The night they'd shared was seared into her body. Her skin still felt tingled and tender, and something inside her, the part that had always been quietly waiting, felt full, not just from the pregnancy, but from being loved, even if he hadn't said it yet, even if he didn't know it himself. She turned carefully, pressing her face to his chest and listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It was the first time in her life she hadn't felt alone in the morning. But the moment wouldn't last. A loud knock came at the chamber doors, sharp and brisk. Alaric stirred with a low grunt, his muscles tightening as he sat up. Eleanor sat too, pulling the blanket up to cover her bare chest, still flushed from the night before. "What is it?" Alaric growled. A servant's muffled voice answered nervously. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace. Lord Rhys Everthorne has arrived at the gates, he claims. He was once betrothed to Lady Eleanor." Eleanor's heart stopped. Alaric stilled beside her. He turned his head sharply toward her. "You were once engaged?" She blinked rapidly, paling. "No, I mean, never formally. It was arranged when we were children. Nothing ever came of it." Alaric's jaw tightened. He threw off the covers, rising from the bed. "And yet he's here now." Eleanor clutched the sheets, panic fluttering in her chest. "Please don't be angry." "I'm not angry," Alaric said as he dressed swiftly, but his voice was cold, clipped, distant. "I just don't like uninvited guests who believe they still have claims to my wife." Eleanor's heart beat faster. She reached for his arm as he finished buttoning his shirt. "Alaric, he means nothing to me." He paused, then looked at her, truly looked. her soft, wide eyes, the tremble in her hand, the way she was still curled in their bed like she belonged to him. "I know," he said, softer now, "but I'm not a man who shares—" Later that morning, the great hall Lord Rhys Everthorne looked nothing like Eleanor remembered. Gone was the scrawny boy with smudged ink-stained fingers and a nervous stammer. In his place stood a striking man, tall, broad-shouldered, with thick dark hair tied back neatly and pale eyes that gleamed with amused arrogance. He wore a sapphire velvet tunic, a wolf insignia pinned to his shoulder. "Lady Eleanor," he greeted her warmly, stepping forward with a charming smile. "You look radiant." Eleanor's spine stiffened, her fingers tightening around her shawl. Alaric stood at her side, towering and still, his arm resting possessively behind her lower back. She could feel the tension in him, sharp and silent. "I didn't expect to see you again," she said softly, politely. Rhys's smile widened. "Nor I, but I heard of your marriage. And the children." His eyes dropped meaningfully to her belly. "I simply had to see for myself. You traveled across 2 territories uninvited to—" "See for yourself?" Alaric's voice was dry as frost. Rhys turned to him. "Of course not, Your Grace. I came to offer my congratulations. Though I must admit, I was surprised. Eleanor was never the type to accept an arranged match, so—" Quickly, Alaric's jaw clenched. "She didn't. I did." Rhys smirked. "Ah, I see." Eleanor shifted, feeling like a fragile flower caught between 2 wolves. She had always known Rhys could be charming, but this was something more calculated. He was goading Alaric, deliberately. "Do you still play the harp, Eleanor?" Rhys asked, eyes softening as he ignored the Duke. "You used to play for the servants in the gardens. You'd hum so quietly I could barely hear, but I always listened." Yes," she murmured. "Sometimes." "She's been playing in the East Wing," Alaric said flatly. "But only for me." Rhys chuckled. "Of course. How fortunate you are." Eleanor was wilting under the attention, feeling small and awkward. Alaric saw it. He stepped forward slightly, shifting his body in front of hers, not blocking her but shielding. "She's not some fragile flower for you to fondle with nostalgia, Lord Everthorne," he said coolly. "She's my wife, she's carrying my children, and she's not some innocent maiden waiting to be rescued. She chose to stay here, with me." Rhys's eyes narrowed faintly. "Did she?" "I did," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. She surprised even herself. "I did choose him." Silence stretched. Then Rhys gave a short mocking bow. "Then I suppose I was mistaken." That evening, their chambers, Alaric said nothing all evening. He remained quiet through dinner, tense, withdrawn. His eyes never left her, but he didn't speak. Eleanor could barely eat. When they returned to their chambers, she sat quietly by the fire while he stood by the window, staring out into the snowy dark. Finally, she stood and crossed to him. "Are you angry with me?" she asked softly. He turned to her. "No," he said, "not with you." "Then with Rhys?" He nodded once. "I don't like men who look at you like they still have a chance." She blinked. Then, slowly, she stepped closer and reached for his hand. "You don't have to be jealous," she whispered. "You already have me." He looked down at her. "Eleanor, I meant what I said. I chose you. Even before I realized I had." He exhaled, his eyes softening. His hand moved to her cheek. "Then say it again." "I choose you," she whispered. He leaned down and kissed her, harder than before. Fiercer. There was no gentleness this time, no hesitance. He kissed her like he was claiming something already his, like he was reminding her, and himself, that she belonged to him. He carried her to the bed without another word. And this time, when they came together, it was with urgency, hunger, possession. He was still careful, still tender, but there was no mistaking the possessiveness in his hands, the low growl in his throat when she whispered his name. "You're mine," he murmured against her skin. "No one else's." "Yes," she breathed. And when she cried out under him, he kissed her again, fierce and deep and unrelenting. Outside, snow fell in silence. Inside, love took root, and jealousy for once had done something good. It had reminded them both how deeply they belonged to one another. Chapter 15. Snow-blanketed stone hearth in layers of ivory lace. The castle's sharp spires pierced the gray sky, but inside, the hearths burned warm and the halls rang softly with music. Midwinter had arrived, bringing the scent of pine, cinnamon, and wood smoke. It had been weeks since Lord Rhys Everthorne had departed, without incident but not without consequence. For the first time, Alaric had shown the world what Eleanor meant to him, but more importantly, he had shown her. And Eleanor, ever meek, ever gentle, bloomed in the quiet warmth of his protection. Tonight, Stonehearth was hosting the Midwinter Eve Ball, a tradition for noble families, a symbol of peace and renewal, but for Alaric and Eleanor, it was a celebration of something much more intimate. It was their true beginning. Candles floated like stars overhead. Musicians played a gentle waltz. Eleanor stood at the top of the grand staircase, one hand pressed lightly to her rounded belly. Her gown was of soft rose-colored velvet, adorned in delicate pearl stitching that shimmered with every movement. A satin ribbon cinched just beneath her bust, highlighting the gentle swell of her pregnancy. She had never looked more radiant. Alaric stood waiting at the base of the stairs. Dressed in a deep black doublet trimmed with silver, he was every bit the feared Alpha Duke, but his eyes held something tender now. His gaze never wavered as she descended, step by step, her small fingers brushing the carved railing. The room quieted. Guests turned to look, but Alaric saw only her. When she reached him, he offered his hand. "You take my breath away," he murmured, voice low against her ear. "Every damn time." Her lashes fluttered. "Even now? Like this?" She glanced shyly at her belly. He placed her hand firmly over his heart. "Especially like this." He led her to the center of the ballroom, where nobles parted respectfully. Alaric pulled her gently into a slow waltz, careful, mindful of her changing body. She followed his lead, light as a breeze. They moved as if the world had melted away, leaving only two hearts in orbit. "I never thought I'd have this," she whispered as they danced. "A real home, a family." "You are my home," he said simply. And then, just before the music reached its crescendo, Alaric dropped to one knee before everyone. Gasps rang out across the ballroom, but Eleanor could only blink in confusion. "Alaric." He took her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. His voice, when he spoke, was clear and deep. "I may have claimed you by duty. I may have bedded you by accident. But Eleanor..." He looked up at her, eyes fierce with vulnerability. "I love you, madly, quietly, fiercely. And I never said it until now because I was afraid of how much I needed you." She trembled. Her heart cracked open like spring soil. "And I don't want to be your duke," he continued. "Not just your mate, not just the father of your children. I want to be your husband, properly, in every sense, in soul and in spirit." He stood, took a small ring from his pocket, gold, simple, etched with twin wolves curled around one another. "Will you marry me? Not because we must, but because you choose me again." Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks. "I already did," she whispered, voice shaking. "But yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes." The ballroom erupted into gentle applause, but neither noticed. He pulled her into his arms, kissed her lips softly, then deeply. There, in the center of everything, they were just a man and a woman who had found one another in spite of it all. Later that night, their chamber's snow fell gently outside the windows as Alaric and Eleanor sat before the fire. He wrapped a fur blanket around her shoulders, then knelt on the carpet, his head resting against the soft swell of her belly. Her fingers moved slowly through his hair. "I've never seen you on one knee," she teased gently. He smiled against her. "Don't get used to it. You were very romantic tonight." He looked up at her. "Because I'm in love with you. That changes things." She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his forehead. "And I love you. You were cold and cruel once. But I see the man beneath now. And I'm not afraid." He pulled her gently into his lap, careful not to jostle her. "Come to bed with me," he whispered, voice husky with adoration. "Not for desire, not for duty, but because I just want to hold my wife tonight." She nodded, shy and pink. He carried her to bed and undressed her slowly, not as a man claiming a body, but as a husband worshipping a gift. They lay beneath the thick covers, skin to skin, breath warming each other. And when he slid inside her, it was not hurried or rough, but slow, unhurried, reverent. He held her face as they moved together, kissing her lips between every whispered promise. "I'll never let you go," he breathed. "You never have to," she whispered back. Their bodies moved as one, with love pulsing like a second heartbeat between them. And when they climaxed, together, quietly, deeply, it felt like the end of everything painful, and the beginning of something whole. Epilogue, the castle echoed with the sound of crying. Not sorrow, but life. 2 newborns, 1 boy, 1 girl, wrapped in silken swaddles, rested in Eleanor's arms. Her face was damp with tears, glowing with joy and exhaustion. Alaric stood by her bedside, frozen. Are they... He looked helpless, like a man who had survived 1,000 battles and was undone by 2 tiny wriggling forms. "They're yours," Eleanor said softly, lifting the boy toward him. He took the child, reverently. His large hands cradled the infant against his chest. The baby yawned. Alaric's throat worked. "He's perfect." "And she is too," Eleanor said, brushing her daughter's cheek. "They're both... ours." He leaned down and kissed Eleanor, deep and lingering. And in that moment, all the cold in him melted forever. For once, the feared Alpha Lord had nothing left to prove, and nothing more to want. He had everything: a mate, a wife, a home, and the only legacy he truly wanted: a family born of love. 5 years later, the forest was quiet under the silver light of the full moon, wind whispering through pine needles like the sigh of an ancient secret. The stillness was broken only by the patter of paws, 4 of them, chasing one another through the underbrush. 2 wolves, one dark as obsidian, tall and proud, the other pale, almost silvery white, lithe and graceful. They danced in and out of shadows, looping between trees in perfect sync. The white wolf yipped playfully, darting ahead. The dark wolf growled low, a playful warning, and pounced, sending them tumbling into a patch of moon-kissed moss. For a few seconds, they lay together, their flanks rising and falling. And then the shift began. A shimmer of light, a crackle of bone, a pulse of warmth. And then there were 2 lovers in the clearing. Bare and breathless beneath the stars, Eleanor laughed softly as Alaric rolled her beneath him, his strong body stretched above hers, his eyes aglow with alpha heat. Her hair spread like pale silk across the forest floor, skin dusted in moonlight. "You always win," she teased. "You let me," he replied, brushing his lips over her cheek. "No," she said, kissing the corner of his mouth. "I just like it when you catch me." He growled, a low, affectionate sound, and nuzzled into her neck. "6 years married," he murmured, "and you still drive me mad." She smiled up at him, her hands exploring the plains of his back. "I used to be afraid of your wolf." He paused, lifting his head. "And now?" "Now I crave him," she whispered. "Crave you. All of you." The grounds of Stone Hearth were blooming. Clematis curled around the garden trellis, wild lavender swayed in the breeze, and the scent of roses followed the winding path down to the private orchard, where the Duke and Duchess of Blackridge now spent their quiet mornings. 5 years had passed since that winter's eve. 5 years of soft kisses, sleepy mornings, tiny feet scampering down castle halls, and quiet, unspoken gratitude. Eleanor sat beneath a blossom-heavy cherry tree on a thick quilt, her legs curled beneath her, soft blue skirts spread like petals around her. A gentle breeze lifted the pale silk scarf around her shoulders. A worn book rested on her lap, but her gaze kept drifting upward. Alaric was chasing their children across the grass. And he was laughing. His laugh, once a rare sharp thing, was now free and easy, like the deep purr of a contented wolf. His long black hair was tied back in a messy ribbon, and his rolled-up shirt sleeves revealed the muscular arms that had once crushed enemies, and now lifted toddlers onto his shoulders. "Papa, she's cheating again!" cried their son, Adrian, 5 and fearless, his chest puffed like a little prince as he pointed dramatically at his twin sister. "I am not," argued Annalise, bright-eyed and delicate like her mother, her curls bouncing. "He started first." Alaric groaned with theatrical exhaustion. "I give up. 2 against 1 is simply unfair. I demand mercy." The twins pounced. He collapsed into the grass with an exaggerated grunt as they tackled him, one on each arm. Eleanor laughed, softly, as she always did. She hadn't changed much over the years, still quiet, still gentle. But now, loved loudly, without fear. And never again alone. Alaric eventually stood, carrying both children in his arms like squirming sacks of potatoes. "They've conspired to overthrow me," he said as he approached the quilt. "Annalise wants your throne, and Adrian wants my sword. You're the one who taught them to spar," Eleanor teased as she smoothed her skirts and made room beside her. He lowered the children gently and collapsed beside her, breath warm against her neck. The twins raced off again, this time in pursuit of a butterfly, their squeals echoing through the orchard. Alaric wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her into his side. She melted into him. "I miss this," he murmured. "You were only gone 2 days," she replied, brushing a blade of grass from his collar. "Too long." His hand found hers, their fingers twining in silent devotion. He brought her knuckles to his lips. "Do you remember," he said quietly, "when I was the coldest man you'd ever met?" "I do," she replied with a smile. "And I remember the moment I saw the warmth under all of it." He leaned close, his forehead touching hers. "I think I fell in love with you the first time you looked at me like I wasn't something to fear," he whispered. "And I keep falling, every day." She blinked back soft tears. "You give me everything I never thought I could have. You gave me something to come home to," he murmured. "Something to protect, not because it was my duty, but because it's mine." "You're mine, Eleanor, still. Always." He kissed her gently, years of affection pressed into one delicate touch. Her fingers curled into his chest, and they lingered there under the sun, wrapped in the quiet fullness of a life they built from broken beginnings. In the distance, the twins tumbled through the tall grass like cubs. Eleanor laid her head on his shoulder and exhaled. There were no threats now, no bitter court schemes or cruel noblemen, just birdsong, laughter, the beating of 2 hearts still in sync. "Shall we go inside?" Alaric asked, voice low against her temple. She smiled, cheeks flushing. "Whatever for?" He kissed the shell of her ear. "To remind you that no matter how many years pass, I still hunger for my wife." Her breath caught. "I'll race you there," she whispered, rising on shaky legs and bolting. Alaric groaned and gave chase, shouting, "Unfair, Duchess!" Their laughter joined the wind, and behind them the flowers continued to bloom. Later, as they walked back toward the castle, hand in hand, moonlight draping them in silver, they spoke of the twins, Adrian and Annalise, 6 years old now, wild and brilliant, born of an alpha's power and a gentle soul's love. "She shifted today," Alaric said suddenly, glancing sideways. "Who?" Eleanor asked, blinking. "Annalise. Just her hand, only for a moment." His voice was reverent. It was fast. Tears shimmered in Eleanor's eyes. "So soon. She's strong. Like her mother." Eleanor leaned into him, pressing her cheek to his arm. "And Adrian?" "He's the heart, she's the teeth." "Perfect pair," she whispered. They reached the edge of the castle gardens where stone met moonlit blooms. A new bench had been carved there, overlooking the forest. Eleanor sat, wrapping the fur-lined cloak tighter around her as Alaric knelt before her and laid his head on her lap. She stroked his hair, fingers threading through the dark strands that had only just begun to silver at the edges. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. "Marrying me?" He looked up, stunned. "Never. You were forced. We didn't even like each other." He took her hand, kissed the inside of her wrist where her pulse fluttered. "I loved you before I even knew it. I was just too damn stubborn to see it." "And now?" she asked shyly. "Now I can't imagine life before you." The moon crested fully overhead. Alaric stood and offered his hand. "Run with me again," he whispered. She took it, smiled. They stepped together into the clearing once more. And when they shifted, him into the dark power of the Alpha, her into the glowing grace of the Luna, it wasn't for escape. It was celebration. 2 wolves mated for life. 2 souls who had braved cold halls, bitter glares, and forced vows. Now, together, they ran wild through the forest they had once ruled alone. Not as Duke and Duchess, not even as Alpha and Luna, but simply as Alaric and Eleanor. Bound by love, forever. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you loved it, kindly comment below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon for more amazing content. Drop a comment with your favorite moment, and I'll see you in the next one.